Wonderful. And then I'm gonna share the screen. Great. So if you want to step up here and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Erin. Thanks y'all for showing up. I'm gonna talk to you. My name's Tim MacArthur. I'm with the Colorado State Public Defender. I'm the program director for the training. Oh, there we go. Trying to see what it looks like.
Yeah, there we go.
I was gonna say, put it on the table.
I'm gonna get a better table for this, but keep.
Well, I'll keep talking like this. I'm the program director for the social workers, so the social work part of the public defender's office. We're a centralized office, so we cover the whole state. We have 21 separate trial offices. So our social workers are kind of stationed throughout those offices. But today, I'm not going to talk to you about our system so much because I did that yesterday. Today, what I'm going to go into is like this specific model, which is very unique. When I first started, there was barely anyone doing this, but it's really started to expand. Like we have somebody here that's doing this in their internship. So I think that it's really, I mean, forensic social work in itself was really niche, but defense-based forensic social work is super, super niche, but it's really increasing in popularity exponentially. And then, in like I said yesterday, your program is really unique in that you can really focus in on some of these practices where a lot of people, most people with grad programs are not getting this information. And what I mean by defense-based forensic social work, just in case anybody's unsure, we work, so the criminal justice system is very adversarial. So there's like the DA's office that represents the victim, and they are prosecuting the person that is alleged to have committed whatever offense. We represent the person that is the alleged perpetrator of that offense. And specifically, the public defender model is most of the time for people who cannot afford their own representation. The exemption to that would be we sometimes represent youth whose parents are unable or unwilling to provide them defense. And so sometimes there's not that income requirement with that, but generally our clients are at the poverty level, or if not pretty close to it. Okay. For those who are not privy to the criminal justice system and kind of what it looks like, there's a bunch of different ways that you can practice in this model. So it's not just like one public defender. There's multiple types of public defenders, and these may or may not employ social workers, but I think at this point most of them do. So your traditional defense is like when I mentioned that adversarial system, like that's what you think of. The municipal is more of like your city level. So if you got a ticket from the Austin Police Department and you had to appear in municipal court, that's what municipal looks like. County is kind of expanded, so that's generally a bigger deal. That would be like whatever county you're in. And most of the cases are going to be county based. So that could be anywhere from like a DUI or a speeding ticket all the way up to like felony homicide. Federal cases are also federal. There is a federal public defender, and they do utilize social workers. But federal cases are they're their own thing. So what qualifies as something being a federal offense is a lot different than what qualifies to be a county offense. I mean, Thea, could you summarize that quickly as to like when it would be federal versus like a state?
Are usually larger quantities of controlled substances, interstate crimes against the state as an entity, I would say.
Okay.
Or like things that affect interstate commerce, like child pornography.
Yeah, my understanding is pretty much like anything, if you cross state lines, like it's gonna be federal, but that's not always the case, because I've seen come up, I'm like, why do we have this case? Why don't the feds have it? So I don't, it's not an exact science, I guess, I don't know. DNN, that, it may be called different things in different states or different jurisdictions. Colorado, we call them dependency neglect cases, so that's generally what you think of when you think of DES, CPS, like child protection getting involved. If someone has a kid and there's a complaint filed against them, and the county decides to move forward with potentially removal, they would go into this kind of court practice. So it's a very specific type of court. It's somewhat different than like your county or even municipal. It's its own thing. I listed two different organizations that we have in Colorado. I'm sure it looks different in every other state, but there's the Office of the Child's Representative. I'm pretty sure what that sounds for. I would just call them by their acronym, so I don't ever have to spell it out. So they represent the children in these cases, but then there's also the Respondent Parents Council, which represents the parents. And then kind of I know that there's guardian ad litems, which kind of cross over between your traditional court and your DNN court. Because I've worked with multiple guardian ad litems that are kind of doing both. And sometimes we have kids that are in both systems that we represent. And I know that the guardian ad litems employ social workers. I know that our Office of Respondent Parent Council employs social workers. So there's multiple spots that you could do this practice, other than just like the one that I do in Colorado, which is the county-based public defender's office. Then there are also specialty court models, and some of you are probably familiar with this, whether you knew it or not. Like anyone that ever refers to a drug court, that's what they're talking about. So it's different than it's supposed to be, any kind of specialty court is supposed to be structured differently than the traditional court model. The traditional court model is what everybody knows, with the judge up here, the DA over there, and the defense on the other side, and we're going to trial, and it's one side arguing versus the other side, maybe a jury involved. Specialty courts don't look like that. It's if you're practicing in a specialty court with true fidelity to the model, the judge basically has to, it's all about the relationship of the judge with the client. And the client has to feel like the judge is invested in their success. So if it is done with true fidelity to the model, these are really, really effective, extremely effective. But where we get less effective is where we start treating it more of that hierarchical model, and the judge starts kind of like being more, what am I trying to say, like assertive, authoritative, trying to tell the client, you need to do this and that and that and that and that, and it's like too much to do, and it's overload. You're pretty much setting the client up for failure. That's where we see things go wrong. But the most common practice of this is a drug court. There's also, I mean, in Colorado, these are all the different types of specialty courts we have. I could imagine there's probably other ones going on here. So tell me if you know one that's not on this list. But in certain jurisdictions, we have courts for clients that are incompetent. We have youth-specific courts. So you're not in with the main like adult judge. There's a judge and a public defender and a DA that specifically practice with youth and are trying to be sensitive to youth needs and to be less punitive. We have veterans courts, we have mental health courts. You know of anything else? Any other kind of specialty?
These are the big ones. We have a couple of them, and there are veterans courts in Texas, just not in.
Yeah. And it's up to the jurisdiction whether they want to, do a specialty court. So not every one of our jurisdictions has a specialty court. It's kind of up to, the head judge, whether they want to introduce this model. There's some hesitance on their part. It takes a little bit more work, a little bit more time, you need a dedicated docket. But like I said, when you do it right, it is very effective. You just have to get the buy-in from the bench. And that can be difficult with some of your more traditional judges that are used to it being, that adversarial model and hierarchical, and I tell you what to do. that can be really hard to do. Also, the use of incentives is a unique one to this, because generally your traditional model, it's all about the sanctions. Like you did this wrong and you're going to get this punishment. But with specialty court, it's trying to get client to, like, you're almost encouraging good behavior rather than just like using positive punishment for bad behavior. The history of the model, I'm just gonna summarize it. Now, this is a general history, so it's kind of the history as applies to us, our agency, the Colorado State Public Defender. But I think it's also kind of a general history of the practice itself also. I mean, where this really started, and Thea does a great job in her paper breaking this down also. So always like reference that for more specifics, but it really did kind of start out with the death penalty cases and doing mitigation on death penalty cases. And because it is like federally required, there are certain things that you have to look for in order to proceed on these cases. And it's kind of the advantage of the practice, because if you can like say that you can identify that your client has a developmental disability, that initiates like, oh, your client no longer can be executed per like the Supreme Court ruling, right? So there's actually like some legislative process that is established, protocols for mitigation there. But in the frontline practice, what we do now, because we don't have death penalty cases, there's not necessarily those standards. There's not those protocols that says you have to do this way. And on these cases, you have to have this. It's more, we're just kind of presenting this information. And because sentencing is discretionary, we're trying to get a better outcome based on, whatever the influencing factor we believe it is. So mimicking, I talked about this a lot yesterday, so I'll somewhat summarize it today, but in trying to mimic what it looked like in capital cases, we can put social workers on, your F1 homicides. I also included direct files in this. I'm not sure if anybody knows what that is here. I know you have them, you just probably call them something different.
We do call them.
You have direct file / transfer cases. It depends. So a direct file is a youth that is not charged in the youth court as a youth. They are charged as an adult directly because of the severity of the offense or several different reasons. There's always a protocol for how a DA can direct file a case, but that basically just means a youth that is directly charged as an adult. And it's up to us to try to get that moved back into youth specific court versus the transfer case. It's the opposite. So the DA is not able to charge it directly as an adult due to either the kid's too young or the case isn't severe enough, but the DA is trying to get it transferred up to adult court. And the sentences would look like if you are a kid and you are in youth court, then you would go into, if you were sentenced to like what we call commitment, it's basically like kid prison. So you would be with other kids your age versus if you are charged and sentenced as an adult, you go to adult prison. Right? It's not exactly that way, but pretty much like that, right? So we always want to keep our kids with other kids because we know when you mix a low risk individual with a high risk individuals, the low risk individual becomes high risk. So we want to always try to advocate for, like, we're thinking about long-term here and what is going to be rehabilitated for this individual and therefore better for society. And so the outcome is generally going to be better if we can keep kids with kids. NGRI, does anybody know what that acronym stands for?
Not guilty by reason of insanity.
You got it. Got it. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's someone that during the time of the offense was in a psychotic episode, most of the time in a psychotic episode. And we show that they did not commit this crime with like intent. It's too long to summarize here, but we're looking into their mental health, into the history of their mental health at the time of offense, prior to the offense. Was there prodromal, meaning pre-existing symptomology before the onset of psychosis? And was this, how much did substances influence this? We're kind of exhaustively looking at this, but the reason why this is so important is because if someone is found not guilty by reason of insanity, then they're generally committed to the mental health facility and not sentenced to prison. So it's more of a treatment-based outcome rather than a punitive outcome. The other one that's included on this are what we call bubble cases, and that's kind of a slang term, but it basically means, your client is on the precipice of they could either go to prison or they could get a community sentence to like probation. And we're trying to see if we can sway things to get them, maybe with mitigation, we could get them a community-based sentence rather than going to prison. The other side of this, so we're doing mitigation on those types of cases, but the other side of this is related to bubble cases is we're doing a lot of casework where we're trying to we're first identifying like what the issue is. Is it mental health? Is it substance abuse? Is it just more like living, so activities of daily living support, adaptive functioning? And what resources do they need to be able to kind of fix the issue that's going on? So we see this a lot with our competency docket, where these clients generally have severe persistent mental illness, and they're we call them high flyers because they just come back and back over and over and over again. So our community mental health centers are dealing with these clients. The justice system is dealing with these clients. And so Colorado right now is really trying to figure out like, how do we best serve this clientele? Some of our jurisdictions have implemented a competency specific docket, and they're trying to bring more people into play to really figure out how do we keep this clientele from recidivating back and back over and over again into in and out of the system. It really is a product of deinstitutionalization back in the 70s, 80s, when they just, they over-institutionalized people and they shut those institutions down, which is good, but then they didn't create any kind of backup plan. So our clients are still institutionalized, they're just institutionalized in jail. They're incarcerated. Like jails and prisons are the new institutions. It's not like it went away. We didn't have any kind of backup plan. So now we're like trying to figure out what's the backup plan going to be, what's it going to look like. And then I mentioned peer support specialists in this because that is hopefully like a position that in other jurisdictions they are utilizing, and hopefully our organization will be able to allocate some funding to this, where they are solely dedicated to like getting that client connected with whatever resources, whether it be things that meet their basic needs, housing, or therapy, like mental health support, etc. In terms of ethics, this one gets, I know we had, again, yesterday we had a conversation about this ad infinitum, but today I do want to hit a few points a little bit more specifically. And the main one is that in this practice, we really emphasize being client-centered. So we want to focus on the client's needs. What's the client's perspective? What does the client want? Rather than assuming that we know what's best for them and kind of taking that, authoritative, assertive role, like you need to do this, and you're automatically going to create resistance in the client that way. The attorney very specifically has to advocate for this. Even if the attorney's like, no, you don't want to go to trial, I'm telling you it's a bad idea, you're going to lose, you're going to get a bad outcome. If the client says, no, that's what I want, they have to do it. Social workers are by default are part of the legal team, and so we somewhat fall into that. But we don't necessarily have to go up and express that opinion in court. Like one of the balances we've got to strike, and that's why this is an ethical issue, is that we have to maintain our professional rapport with the court. The court has to see us as being like neutral individuals, not that we're not just going to parrot out what the client says they want. Like we are seen as experts where we practice clinically, like we do our assessments. And so we really intentionally want to make sure that we set boundaries between if we are being pressured to say something that we do not believe in, that we do not support, then we don't take that stance. And the attorney can go make that, but we're not going to like make edits and put in our report something that we don't endorse, I'll get into the language a little bit, but like the attorney-client privilege is something that comes up a lot. And it could be like its own presentation. When I've done an ethics presentation, I've had to hit this one for at least half, if not more of it, because social workers, we're mandatory reporters. Mandatory reporting is a state law, so state by state sets what the law looks like. But attorneys are not mandatory report. Well, except in Texas, I guess everybody's a mandatory reporter in Texas, so I guess I should be careful what I say here. But the attorneys practice under attorney-client privilege, which means like no information gets out except in very, very, very specific circumstances. So it's a lot more broad than mandatory reporting. And so that can create a little bit of a, not necessarily a conflict, but it can be sticky at first. And some situations can be especially sticky. So what it entails is just a conversation. Initially, before if a agency has never had social workers, they need to be aware of kind of this issue, and they need to figure out a protocol for how to get around it. And there also needs to be constant supervision for when there's something and the social worker is like, look, I need to report this. And the attorney's like, no, you don't need to do that. Don't do that. Who can they go up to? Who's the supervisor that they can bring it up to? More minds. So with the public defender's office, you know, we have multiple levels of people that we can bring in and problem solve this issue. So it's not just on the attorney to the social worker. Generally with these situations, the more people you can bring in, more minds that can help and lend perspective, like the better you're going to be and the better the person's going to feel about the outcome. And I hit these two code of ethics from the NASW points. The number one, the value that we always see and value the dignity and the worth of the person. And 1.02, we support the client's right to self-determination, because a lot of times when social workers are unfamiliar with this role and are like, we support our client's right to decide what's best for them. For whatever reason, do it traditional or just assumption, they think that they're still in that like, well, I know what's best for you and I want you to do this. And that's not what the code of ethics says. Yeah, it does give us that exemption for like mandatory reporting requirements, but overall, it really says support your clients. No matter what they've been accused of, they're still people, and what they want, it needs to be respected. I put this one in because I think this is a good starting place. So anyone that has not worked for a public defender's office or worked with this clientele, I can always tell, or if they've worked on the other side, like if they work with probation or with the DA's office, because the verbiage that they use, it is really, to me, does not align with our NASW code of ethics of dignity and worth of a person. We want to always use person-centered language, whether we're talking about a diagnosis or how that client identifies. We want it to be up to them. And so if you're ever gonna interview with a public defender's office, just the best thing you need to know to start off with is follow the terminology in the left-hand column here. I would stray away from the terminology in the right hand, because if you show up and you talk to the client and you're saying, if you call the client a criminal, you call the client a delinquent or a perpetrator, like that's going to automatically make them assume that you're judging them. And our clients haven't been convicted of anything yet. So we don't need to assume guilt right off the bat. We need to try to separate this person from what they do and see them as just a person standing in front of us. Like everybody universally says this, like they're generally kind of afraid when they first get into this, because like, oh my God, these people have done such horrific things. And when they sit with the people, sometimes the people that have done the worst things end up being their favorite clients. I mean, I know that's true with me. So just because someone did like one thing and it's horrible, we don't want to disrespect that or disregard that. Like, yes, what they did was terrible, but they're still a person. And right here, right now, like I'm not going to be able to develop a rapport with this client if I have that bias and I keep that perspective. The holistic defense model is I cited two articles, or at least this one article that really. He does a really good job of summarizing this, and I think I took this verbiage directly from that article. There's a few more, and I sent them to Thea, so you all should have access to it, but. What we've seen with social workers getting involved in these cases is a transition to this holistic practice. So standard practice is we are treated in parallel, like you, social worker, go and do your thing over there and tell me when you're done, give me the report when you're done, and then goodbye. There's not a lot of communication. Likewise, they perceive the clients as just being a case number and an outcome, guilty, not guilty. But they don't, it's, the holistic approach is like, there's still a person and you need to think about the bigger picture here. So we're thinking about long-term outcomes. We're thinking about more than just, so the traditional approach would be like, just get them out of jail and then that's all I care about. They're out, right? But the holistic approach is like, well, when we get you out, like what resources and support do you need in the community to be able to be successful and to not come back, you know, in the immediate future. So that's the holistic. You would think that that would just be cool universally amongst everybody, but there are really some people that it's like the H word, like don't know, we do not practice holistic defense. So a lot of times we've had to do this and just not call it that. But by default, if you're employing a social worker, you're probably starting to get on the side, starting to kind of move towards holistic defense. We talk about social workers, we always talk about changing the system. And I always have this conversation with my social workers, like the system is this big thing out there, but when you work for the public defender's office or a similar agency, you're in the system. This is the system. The public defender's office is a cog in the wheel, right? So how can we, if we can't change the bigger system, how can we at least change that cog? How can we change the public defender's office? And so I know that having social workers in our system has significantly changed it and moved it forward. Like even if we're not calling it necessarily holistic practice, is way more holistic now than it ever was when I started. I've mentioned that word a lot, mitigation. I kind of do. I know I'm recording this, but I do want to put it out, make this a little bit interactive. What does mitigation mean to you? What do you think of when I say that word mitigation?
Finding information about
Information that helps the defense, like in what way?
history taking, record collections, creating a narrative that puts them in a good light or gives context to how they ended up in their situation.
So background information. What comes up for you? You've been doing this, either one of you, but you've been doing this, so you're probably already, you're like, I know exactly what this is.
Information that reduces moral culpability is.
Culpability! The C word. Ding, 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 ding. You win the prize, whatever that is. You won it. Yeah, it really is all about culpability. In the capital cases, there's literally like an equation that says, well, if you have this, then that means they're X less culpable or whatever. But where we practice, it's more discretionary, meaning the judge, so the DA can give us a plea offer, the judge has a range of sentencing options, so they could go at the high end or they could go at the low end. We are trying to figure out, you know, what will help us get the best possible outcome for this client. And mitigation is doing exactly that, providing, like you said, like the history, the background. Can we help? Is the DA at all going to be sympathetic to our client's traumatic background? There is somewhat a separation. So our investigators are solely concerned with the facts of the case. What happened? Mitigation differs in that the best summary I can use is like, how did we get here? Right. So everything precluding up to the offense itself would be mitigation. The offense itself is just like the facts of the case. So if you're just into like crime scene investigation, things like that, investigator is a good spot for you, but mitigation specialists, we deal more with all the influences leading up to, including like multi-generational stuff. So we're talking even before the client was born, what was the family system, you know, like epigenetic kind of factors that come into play, neighborhood they grew up in, it could be infinite, right? That's kind of the challenge in this is you're like, well, how do I take all these different things and then put it forth in whatever I'm limited to here, this like short little document. So that's kind of the challenge of the practice. We initially started doing a lot of, reports. That was the thing. Oh, just get a mitigation report, because again, in capital practice, it's like you need this huge, big mitigation packet. It's pretty much looks like a book, because you're putting this together for a very long time. In our practice, we do not have the time to do that, nor would the DA or judge read that. So we really have to synthesize that material and present it as best we can. So we started to get away from the more like regimented, formulaic approach of like a traditional biopsychosocial. We'd write reports. We're utilizing like creative writing skills. We're utilizing a lot of like narratives, use of narratives. I'm a big proponent of the hero's journey. Familiarize yourself with that, because at the end, we want the reader to be like rooting for our client. Like, oh, they went through their trial and I want them to come back better in the end. Like, that's kind of what we're going for with this. We use a lot of pictures. We've started to transition more to doing presentations just like this one. So we're sitting in front of the court or the DA and like really literally telling the story rather than have them read it. Some agencies are making videos. Our people would love to do that, but it's just, you got to learn you got to take time to learn that format. And that's been the challenge. But when we've been able to do it, it's been extremely effective. So we're really just trying to get creative with it and figure out, well, one, what works, and two, like what's going to engage you. Because if you're just doing the same report over and over and over again, you're going to get bored, you're going to get tired, you're going to get burned out. I'm going to address here, kind of wrapping up. I always want to talk about this in any kind of presentations I give, because it's one thing to get you interested in the practice and bring you into the practice, but to keep you around is a totally different deal. And I've had some amazing social workers that unfortunately left because of these issues. So compassion fatigue is kind of my overall summary of what happens, meaning at first you start out with so much energy and you're like so excited and passionate and like, I'm ready to do the work and I'm going to change the system. I'm going to change the world. Everybody comes out of grad school thinking like, yeah, what am I going to do? I'm going to change everything. And then you kind of get in the system and you have your first outcome that didn't go the way you thought it would. And you keep having like more clients and more clients and more clients, and it's just overwhelming. So secondary traumatic stress is one part of that, where you are hearing this trauma story. People are trauma dumping on you every day, day after day, and it just becomes overwhelming. And then the compounded part of that is if you're hearing this at work, and then you leave work and you go home and you're like watching the news, and it's just constant like bad news, bad news, bad news, bad news, bad news. Maybe I don't know if you're in a bad situation in your family or whatever, but like the more that you pull on, it's just compounded stress, and eventually it weighs you down and you break. So you have to take breaks from the stress of the world. The world could be a very stressful place, but it can also be a very beautiful, bright place. So go outside sometimes, take a walk, breathe, do whatever I mentioned the third thing, find a third thing, do whatever your thing is to get away from it sometimes. Because if you don't, you will burn out. That's to me, the formula of what leads to burnout. I was given this lecture when I was sitting there and I was like, yeah, whatever. But it's for real. And it's really hard for people to set boundaries, but you have to set boundaries at some point, or else you're inevitably going to burn out and you're going to leave the practice. And we don't want less social workers. We want more social workers, and we want the good social workers to stick around. And we don't want the good social workers to become bad social workers, because generally when they become bad social workers, it's because of this. So set boundaries, find a third thing, I mentioned the third thing yesterday, but I'll just go over it again. So your first thing should always be your family. Your second thing should be your job. The third thing is something completely independent of those two things, something you just do for you. Moral injury, I talked about this yesterday also, but this is super important. It's super crucial. It's another factor to burnout. It's if you've ever been in a job and you've had to do something that went against your own values and your own core beliefs, you have experienced moral injury. If it's one time, it's pretty damaging, but if you're continually having to do this, it can lead to pretty severe repercussions. Be very vigilant against this, because there's a lot of pressure, especially on newer social workers. They get out of the field, there's always the imposter syndrome, like I gotta prove myself and I'm just gonna do whatever because I just want to fit in, I don't want to rock the boat. But it's a lot easier to set boundaries initially than to create bad habits and bad expectations to try to set them retroactively. So initially, if something doesn't feel right, you got to find a supervisor. You've got to discuss it with them. Ideally, a couple supervisors. So in our system, we have an attorney supervisor, and then we have myself. So the social workers can go to both, and we can get both perspectives. And if necessary, like we could bring in an office head, like we could bring in a third party, but we will figure it out either way. So it's not just on you. That's my summary of defense-based forensic social work. Now you're all experts. Who needs a whole class? Questions, thoughts?
How long do you typically work with clients?
You're talking about longitudinally in total, from when the case is open to when it closes?
Yeah.
It depends. Sometimes we can just go in one visit and do just like a quick quick meeting and kind of give those observations to the attorney. Sometimes these cases go on for years, like our very severe cases could be 3-4 years. I would say the average is probably 6 months-ish. 6 months to a year is probably a rough average, just depending upon what kind of case it is. If it's a youth-focused case, we want to get them out quick. We don't want them lagering in the system, because if you we talk about mixing low-risk populations with high-risk populations increases the risk for low risk. Same thing if you over-supervise somebody that's low risk, you increase their risk. So we don't want them sticking around longer than they need to. We want to get those cases out and done quick.
How did you get into the work?
I did like a million other things. I've worked with pretty much every population there is prior to this. And I started in the social work world on the other side. So the post convictions, they would do like probation, court mandated treatment, probation. I worked in one of the specialty courts for a while, basically a drug court. And then this opportunity came up, and I'd never heard of it before. I thought it was awesome. I met with the attorneys and was like, jumped right in. And now I couldn't leave this job even if I wanted to. Like, I don't know what else I would do now. I could do therapy, but it's just, I feel like this practice is sometimes more therapeutic. It's what we're doing is basically narrative therapy. So we're getting people to process all the trauma that's happened to them in a way that lets them kind of move on, because generally our clients are stuck in their trauma and they keep rehashing it over and over and over again. What I think Freud called it mastery. Van der Kolk, I can't remember the terminology he had for it, but we see that with our clients all the time. And so through our process, we're not doing therapy, but it is incredibly therapeutic. And I think that's what keeps me sticking around, because it would be hard to do therapy now that I'm used to doing it this way.
I was gonna ask, kind of going back to burnout, what from social workers that you've worked with that have worked in this area for a long time, what is kind of the qualities that you see in them that kind of I guess like build like a resilience to the work?
The ones that stick around.
Yeah,
Yeah, number one, set boundaries. They don't overcommit themselves, like the challenges they want to give. Sometimes I think the difference is a lot of times they want to give like 100% to every single client, and they're just like so invested in this. And I have to, with a lot of them in supervision, I'll step back and I'm saying, are you doing this for the client, or are you doing this for you? This is about you. And that makes them click. It's like, why are you putting so much time? Did the client ask you to come? Did the client ask you to do all this? That I think is what I see a lot of the time. And then being able to have a third thing. On our side, it's having good supervision. So if there's a very supportive attorney in the office, then they generally there's great offices that are very supportive of social workers. There's some that we're still working on. So that's the other part.
What does the client case process look? So when you first get their case, do you like start with an intake and then go into mitigation, like throughout the time that they are on the case? What are the steps that you go through?
Yeah, we want to start with when it comes to the referral to the social worker, so they see that and then they kind of review the situation, and then they meet with the attorney on the case to try to get a feel for what the attorney wants. What's the ideal outcome here? Like, how do you see us as being effective on the case? Then we try to go in and meet the client all together with the team, so that the client sees that the social worker is part of the public defender's office. I spoke about this yesterday, but your clients have an idea when you walk in and you say you're a social worker, that brings up things in their mind, because maybe they had previous interactions with social workers, maybe as a child. A lot of our clients have had CPS involvement, so they maybe it didn't go over well. Maybe, oh, you're the one that broke up my family, or they automatically are like, oh, I need to be careful what I say around you. So we have to be very articulate about what our role is, and that we are with the defense team. We're not like DHS coming in, because they automatically think we're DHS coming in here trying to get you in trouble for something. But we have to really say, yes, we are social workers, but we practice in a different role than maybe what you're used to. So once we met with them as a team, then we just start meeting with them one-on-one in person. We do, I don't know if you've ever heard of SOAP notes. Yeah, y'all know your SOAP notes. That's to justify insurance coverage, Medicaid funding, right? We don't have to do that because we're self-funded. But we do I utilize a similar format to that. So the notes that we take are like, how does the client present? So we're basically doing a mental status exam when in that first visit. And then the next part is, what did you talk about? What's the content of the discussion? And then the last part will be like, what's your plan? So are you going to come back and see this client? Did you tell the client you're going to come back in 2 weeks? Do you need to get records? Like that kind of thing. We document that. And then so the next parts are just following up on that plan. Subsequent visits, potentially we're talking to mitigation witnesses, so family, friends, teachers, anybody that can give us some perspective on this client. We're reviewing records, trying to get every record we can to see what's the whole picture here. Because our clients are giving us one side of things, but when we bring in the records and we talk to family, we get like generally a much better picture of what's really going, what's the big picture here. Because clients are the experts in their own lives, but sometimes they don't have the insight. They don't know that they were traumatized. To them, that was just normal. So getting a lot of those background sources is super important. Then eventually we get to here, we're good enough. We feel we've got what we needed here. We put out our product in whatever form. And then we move on to the next one.
How many clients do you typically work with at a time?
It's hard to say. It kind of depends on the social worker and the cases they have and the jurisdiction. Some cases require a lot more time and effort than others. Social workers kind of tell us when they're tapped out and need a break. I would say the average, probably like maybe like 10 to 20 would be average. In what, there's a difference between like active cases, what you are working on right now. So I have, when I color code my system, and it's like green cases, and green cases are like, these are the cases I need to really be concerned on, working on, and actively invested in, and that might be like 4 or 5 cases. Then I have white cases, which are like, well, I've done the majority of the work, but I'm like waiting on records or something like that. And those are probably like 8 or 9 cases. And then I have my red cases, which are like, I pretty much did everything. Now I'm just waiting on sentencing or something like that. And they're kind of just sitting in the background.
So they're all different stages.
Yeah, exactly. And the challenge of new social workers coming in, like established social workers have figured out a way to work real efficiently and like, okay, I got this case going, I need to set this and then do that and that. But the challenge of new social workers is learning how to be efficient with your time and yeah, not just exhaust yourself, because you could put exhaustive number of hours in every case, but if you want to have a life and not burn out, you gotta figure out a system somehow.
What is the average hours per week?
We're salary, so it's not like clock in, clock out. It allows us to be flexible. So it's as long as you're getting work done, like nobody's gonna ask any questions. So it's the office is open 8 to 5, but you know, if you want to be flexible with your time, let's say like we have some social workers that have children that have to provide childcare. We want to be flexible and sensitive to that. So we allow, it's not like we're a hybrid system, so you can be in the office, you can be at home. I mean, you're a social worker, you're gonna be out in the community. You gotta see your client in jail, you gotta go see mom out in whatever neighborhood, potentially I mean, no one's checking in on you. So we really want to stick like 40 hours a week, it'd be great. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes it's a little less, like kind of flexes, but the challenge, it's great in that it's flexible. The challenge with that system, I don't know if you're doing that in your own job. It's like, when do you clock out? When do you turn off? I have that problem myself. It's like, when am I not looking at emails? Okay, I'm not looking at emails. It's like 8 o'clock at night. I'm gonna sit here and be present, you know, with my spouse or just go on a walk and not look at emails. Like that's the challenge with the flexible system.
I'm curious, like, is there something, I mean, obviously you gave us sources to read about like the holistic model and everything, but I feel like logistically, the experience that I have and then comparing it to what you're saying is super interesting because the social workers at our office will have like 30 to 40 cases at a time. And that just seems a lot higher than what you said. And then also just simpler things like you said yesterday, you don't drive clients, like that's just a hard stop. I can't drive clients because I'm an intern, but like the social workers do. And that takes up a lot of their time because they're doing like coordinated releases, they're doing like integral care appointments, driving back and forth, and it really takes up a lot of their time that they could be focusing on mitigation. So I'm curious, like when setting up the social workers and everything, like how did you find what the boundaries were and like what the best practices were?
The driving thing was our leadership. They're explicit, like we are not going to be liable for that. So attorneys cannot take possession of client property. And so that's with the case management stuff that gets sticky. Like how can I be a case manager and like not even touch anything that belongs to the client? But the driving is like, if you're driving the car, you get in a wreck, the state of, because we're state funded, the state of Colorado is going to say, it's already says you cannot transport anybody in a state vehicle that does not work for the state of Colorado. So no family, no friends, no clients. That's like above our head, which, I mean, it spares us the liability, but then it's also, man, if I could just drive my client to the DMV and sit with him and get him a freaking driver's license or to the Social Security office, like that would just save me so much time. But I can't. So how do I do it? Again, I could go sit on a bus with my client, I guess. I don't know. It's my answer to your question. It's organizational. The organization has to set their own standards. So if there's something that you are concerned about, my hope would be the organization would be receptive to your concerns and figure out how do we address this.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much like concerns, it's just more like interesting that
Yeah.
there's such different best practices, even though we're doing like really similar work. So I was just curious if there's like a way that you connect with like other social workers across the country or anything like that.
Things like this,
Like
there's
this
national
specific-
conferences, well,
Yeah.
this model's really expanded, so if you wanna go further into this. Couple organizations I could recommend, number one, the National Association of Public Defenders, NAPD. They have social work specific track, actually their executive director, Lori James Towns, is a social worker and has done mitigation for a very long time. They have tons of trainings on mitigation and they employ, and that's a way to connect with all the different social workers in the nation. Also, there's another organization called, that's more general to just forensic practice, but it's called the National Organization of Forensic Social Work. You can get involved, so I'm gonna present at their conference in New Orleans in June. They have a conference where all different practices get together. When I first started going to their conferences, I was one of the only defense-based social workers. Now we take up like a quarter of their spots. So that just tells you that it's not just expanding in our state, it's expanding everywhere. But those situations are great, just sitting down, figuring out how can we meet. So NAPD has like a national social workers every other Tuesday or something like that, where social workers can kind of get together and just bring, like, what do you do in your office? What do you do in your office? You know, so those kind of opportunities are out there and they're super helpful.
And you have the names of like, there's conferences and that, okay.
NAPD has several different, so they have a main conference, but they also have like a mitigation specific training. Oh, Advancing Real Change is another one. They're like an East Coast organization, but like right now I have a social worker that's at their conference in Jacksonville. That's getting their perspective. So that's another advantage of our system. We're centralized. Like I can't be two places at once, so I can just send them out there to get the information, bring it, and then bring it back and train all of us on what you learned, right? So yeah, talking to your colleagues, going to conferences, doing there's virtual trainings if you can't go to conferences. There's a lot of opportunities out there. Like I said, there was nothing when I started, and now there's a lot.
There's a lot of virtual stuff too, for free, all of theirs.
One of ARC's main people, I forget her name, maybe you know it. She's a mitigation practitioner. I think she's also a professor at Texas Tech. She's in Lubbock.
Oh. Jill Patterson,
There you go, Jill Patterson.
so writing professor, she does a lot about narrative.
She has on her website, just Google Jill Patterson, her website. She has a whole huge list of like creative mitigation techniques and things like that stuff. I've learned lots from her.
The director of the Baltimore Office of Art is one of my students. She's UMSW. So they hired me to.
So I'm anticipating in a year, 2 years from now, like this auditorium.
Sure. And I guess one last question, I was just thinking about for our undergrads, like what would be a good entry point into this work?
I've thought about that with like the case management. So we have interns, but we've decided we're only gonna take master's level interns because we're so mitigation centric and we can't really supervise somebody just doing case management. And I don't feel like from our experience, we don't feel like bachelor's levels yet at where they could take on like mitigation in severe cases. So my thought is, what I want to do is employ the peer support model and have it more focused on case management, and then employ the BSWs on that side of things. Because I think like the clinic, because our mitigation reports are so clinical, you don't really get that in undergrad. That's more of a graduate thing where you learn about DSM and diagnoses, et cetera. And so that's why I think like BSWs have got to be more on the case management side. I think it also helps them network with community partners and develop relationships, learn about resources. So when they get out, if they don't work for us, maybe they'll work for somebody else.
Oh, I did my BSW case management. Private defender's office. And Corinne was case management social worker at the Knox County, like, there are public defenders offices that will take BSW.
Yeah, cause even thinking about like, you know, BSWs that wanna go get their, you know, get their MSSW, you know, where, how do they kind of figure out if this is something that they're interested in, where do they get started?
Yeah, you all just hit up the public defender's office and say, hey, I want to intern with you. What do I gotta do? There are social workers there and public defender's office sets their own standard for internship program, so. You're nice enough to them and you give them, you use that language that I told you about. And the biggest thing that when I get internship offers, that either, well, if they are, tell me why you want to work with our clients. Because there's a lot of bias against our clients. A lot of people are like, those bad people, they've done such horrible things. They're so concentrated on the event itself. And not seeing the bigger picture or wanting to look into that, not having that curiosity. So just tell us why you want to work with our clientele, what you know about the public defender's office, rather than that general, oh, I think I'll be a good, you know, I think I'll be, due to my skill set, I think I'll be a good fit for your organization. Why? What do you even know about my organization? Yeah. You pitch a good cover letter, you'll get it.
Great. Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you so much.
For
This is
sure.
awesome. I'm so, hopefully, you know, I'm like Mercury retrograde. I hope that everything. But, oh, wait.
I'm good.